Tonight, we begin with a decision that senior defense officials are quietly calling historic, a reversal so sweeping, so absolute, that it immediately altered the strategic balance of this war, not a tweak, not an expansion with conditions. A full authorization, one that previous administrations refused to sign for nearly 3 years. And when that authorization landed, Moscow didn't respond with threats. They panicked. Before we go any further, subscribe right now. This is not a routine update. This is one of those moments that reshapes conflicts. And you're going to want to follow what comes next. What Washington approved this week crossed a threshold Russia spent years trying to keep intact. For 3 years, Moscow relied on one constant: American restraint. That restraint is now gone. For the first time since this war began, Ukraine has been granted unrestricted authority to strike deep into Russian territory using advanced American-supported drone capabilities. No geographic limits, no case-by-case approval, no ambiguity, and the Kremlin was not prepared. Within hours, emergency statements poured out of Moscow. Senior military commanders were summoned. Russian state media abruptly shifted from confidence to containment. This was not posturing. This was damage control. To understand why the reaction was so intense, imagine the scene inside the Kremlin that morning. Vladimir Putin seated with his inner circle, defense officials, intelligence chiefs, senior diplomats, reviewing reports from Washington. Reports confirming something they had long assumed would never happen. Their strategy had just collapsed. Defense planners had built years of doctrine around one assumption: that American caution would protect Russian territory. That assumption vanished with a single decision. If you're following this so far, hit like and subscribe. This is where the story turns sharply. For years, there were subtle signals that restrictions might not hold forever. Congressional pressure, frustration from military commanders, allies pushing for broader authorization. But policy still followed a predictable rhythm, incremental, cautious, tightly managed. That rhythm shattered this week. When American policy shifts this decisively, it's because political calculations have fundamentally changed. Leaders concluded that restraint was no longer containing the war, it was prolonging it. And that realization changed everything. Here's what was authorized and why Russian commanders immediately recognized the danger. The new framework allows Ukraine to conduct long-range drone operations without territorial limits, supported by advanced reconnaissance, integration, and real-time intelligence coordination. Previously restricted electronic warfare support has been expanded. Targeting authority has been simplified. What was once delayed by layers of approval is now operational. One senior defense official described it bluntly: the capability was always there. Only the permission was missing. Think about that. Russia didn't lose an advantage because Ukraine suddenly became stronger. Russia lost it because American hesitation ended. And when military strategies depend on enemy restraint, the moment that restraint disappears, panic follows. That panic was visible almost immediately. Russian officials publicly accused Washington of escalation. They warned of consequences, but notice what they didn't do. They didn't threaten immediate retaliation. They didn't escalate. They moved to protect themselves within 48 hours. Russian air defenses were redeployed away from front lines. Planned offensive operations were paused. Critical infrastructure was reinforced. State media pivoted to reassurance messaging. These are not signs of confidence. These are emergency measures. And if this analysis is helping you understand what's actually happening behind the headlines, subscribe now. You don't want to miss what this leads to. Russia's response revealed something more important than any statement: fear of exposure. For 3 years, Russian territory functioned as sanctuary. That sanctuary is now gone. Ukrainian drones are no longer constrained by geography. Russian planners can no longer assume safety beyond the front lines. Every installation, every logistics hub, every command node must now be defended. That stretches defenses thin. It forces trade-offs. It weakens positions elsewhere. And Russia knows it. Intelligence analysts now believe much of Moscow's recent strategy was built around the expectation that restrictions would continue, that political caution would persist, that escalation fears would dominate Western decision-making. That expectation collapsed this week, and the psychological impact on Putin may be the most significant consequence of all. His planning relied on predictability, knowing where Ukraine could not strike. That certainty no longer exists. But matching the escalation isn't an option either. Russian forces are already stretched. Resources are strained. Defensive redeployment creates vulnerabilities. Putin is now boxed in by a decision he cannot undo. Defense analysts describe this as a strategic corner, a moment when years of assumptions evaporate overnight. And Ukraine was ready. They had the platforms, they had the intelligence, they had the planning. They were waiting for authorization. Now they have it, and authorization triggers cascading effects. It forces Russia defensive, it signals resolve to allies, it accelerates degradation of Russian capabilities, and it removes the illusion of sanctuary entirely. If you're still watching, subscribe again, because the most dangerous part of this story hasn't happened yet. History shows us that when restrictions are lifted after long hesitation, wars often shift rapidly, not gradually rapidly. The conditions for acceleration are now visible. And what makes this moment especially volatile is timing. This decision landed while Putin is under intense internal pressure. Military, economic, political leaders in that position don't respond calmly. They respond unpredictably. That's why the coming days matter. Ukraine now faces a choice, not whether to use this authority, but how aggressively. The opportunity is immense. So are the risks, and that tension is where this war now lives. Because tonight, one thing is undeniable. American restraint is over. Russian sanctuary is gone. And the next phase of this war has begun. And this is where the consequences start to accelerate, because the moment restrictions disappeared, the war stopped being theoretical for Russia's interior. It became operational. Russian military planners are no longer asking if Ukraine can strike deep. They are asking how often, how coordinated, and how much damage can be done before countermeasures catch up. And if you want to stay ahead of where this is going, subscribe now. This is not a slow-moving story anymore. Intelligence monitoring over the past 48 hours shows something unmistakable. Russia is no longer planning offensively with confidence. Command communications indicate reassessment, hesitation, and redeployment. Air defense assets once dedicated to protecting forward operations are being pulled back to shield territory that was never supposed to be vulnerable. That decision alone carries enormous cost. Every system moved inward weakens Russian positions elsewhere. Every radar reassigned creates a blind spot. Every battery redirected signals uncertainty down the chain of command. And uncertainty is contagious in military hierarchies. Ukraine understands this better than anyone. This authorization doesn't just expand strike options. It forces Russia to defend everything everywhere all at once. And that's a burden no overstretched military handles. Well, if this analysis is adding clarity, hit like. It helps more people see what's actually unfolding beneath the surface. What makes this shift especially dangerous is the psychological pressure it places on Moscow. For years, Russian leadership reassured itself that American caution was permanent, that escalation fears would restrain Western decisions indefinitely, that Ukrainian capabilities would remain bounded by political limits. That comfort is gone. Now, Putin faces a war where Ukrainian planners don't need to ask permission, where intelligence support flows freely, and where targets once considered untouchable must be defended constantly. That transforms every Russian calculation from logistics to morale to internal politics. And internal politics matter here because this decision didn't land in a vacuum. Russian elites are already divided. Military hardliners demand results. Economic stakeholders fear collapse. Security services want accountability for failures. And state media needs victories it can no longer confidently promise. Putin is managing all of that while absorbing a strategic shock he did not anticipate. Leaders under that kind of pressure don't respond from stability. They respond from fear of appearing weak. That's what makes the coming phase so volatile. If you're still with us, subscribe again. The next moves will come fast, and you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Ukraine, meanwhile, has been clear in its messaging. Officials have framed this authorization not as escalation, but as overdue alignment between capability and permission. They've emphasized readiness, discipline, and deliberate targeting. That tone matters. It signals intent to exploit advantage without chaos, but exploitation will come because authorization without action changes nothing. And Ukraine did not push for this decision to sit on it. Analysts now expect a phased response. Initial strikes designed to probe defenses, follow-on operations targeting logistics, coordination nodes, and air defense coverage. Pressure applied unevenly to stretch Russian response capacity. This isn't about spectacle. It's about degradation. And the window matters. Russian defenses are in motion right now. Redeployments are happening under pressure, not preparation. That creates vulnerabilities Ukraine is trained to identify and exploit. The longer Russia scrambles, the greater the opportunity. If you want continued breakdowns like this, hit subscribe. These moments don't repeat, and neither does the insight. But there's risk on the other side of this equation. A Kremlin that feels cornered may lash out. Miscalculations become more likely. Chain of command confusion can produce unintended escalation. History shows that when authoritarian systems absorb sudden shocks, responses are not always proportional or predictable. That's why restraint still matters. Even as restrictions are lifted, Ukraine's challenge now is precision with purpose. Pressure without provocation, maximizing advantage while minimizing uncontrolled escalation. It's a narrow path, but it's one Ukraine has navigated before. And here's the most important point of all. This decision didn't just change what Ukraine can do. It changed what Russia believes is possible. It stripped away the illusion of sanctuary. It exposed how much Russian strategy relied on American hesitation rather than Russian strength. That realization is devastating because once a military understands its security was conditional, not inherent, confidence collapses quickly, and confidence is everything. If this is the kind of analysis you want more of, subscribe and stay with us. The next chapter is already forming. Now bring this back to where it began, a single authorization. A decision delayed for years, a threshold crossed not gradually but completely. What it represents is not just policy change, but strategic rupture. A moment when assumptions failed all at once, Russian sanctuary is over, American hesitation is gone, and Ukraine now operates under a fundamentally different set of rules. The Kremlin knows it, the panic shows it, the redeployments confirm it. Tonight, Moscow is scrambling, not because of what has happened, but because of what can happen next. And that uncertainty is the most dangerous weapon of all. This story is far from finished. The next moves will define the next phase of the war, and when decisions like this are made, history rarely pauses to wait. Stay informed, stay alert, and don't look away.